into this. So first off, can you see the slide deck? Yay, I got thumbs up. Thank you. I put a big asterisk next to phone because I think it's better to conceptualize this as first round interviews, but people still call it phone interviews. So first round interviews, it means if you get one of these first round interviews, it means you're probably in the top 10% of the applicants to the specific faculty member. So it's a big compliment. It's a big deal. So they can take place over the phone, but I think most people are transitioning to Zoom now that faculty members have figured out how to use Zoom. So yeah, phone interviews are, I think, a big compliment, but it's definitely still a point at which there's still a lot of cutting to be done. So essentially, they'll go from 100 applicants who apply to this professor. These are really round numbers. It totally differs depending on the professor, to about 10 people who get phone interviews, and then 2 to 3 people who get we'll call it second round interviews. I have said this before, I will say it again. This process is so idiosyncratic. Every single faculty member at every single school does it differently. And so the fact that you haven't heard from your faculty member at one school, but someone else has heard from a different faculty member at the same school means nothing. The fact that the faculty member you applied to has sent out phone interview invites still means nothing, because they might just have not gotten to your application yet. Please don't read into this too much. This whole process is just really like unstructured. And so it's hard to tell, like, it's hard to prove a negative, I guess. It's hard to prove that you're like absolutely cut out. You are not really like denied admission until like April. So don't beat yourself up too much yet. I have another thought, but I forgot it. As I go along, feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions. Like I said, I don't have that many slides. Trying to leave a lot of room for questions. Okay, I've said this. If you don't have phone interviews yet, don't panic. They're often scheduled into January. Think about yourselves as students at the end of this fall semester, being really stressed. You have a bunch of finals. You're really excited about the holidays. You just need a break. You need to catch up on sleep. That's how faculty are feeling too. A lot of them are going to put this off until January. And I was telling people earlier, before I started the whole presentation, I actually had, I call it a second round interview without having a first round interview. So I was outright invited to an in-person interview. This was before the pandemic, an in-person interview without having done a phone interview. So that also does happen, and that's not that crazy. So just don't read too much into anything. And so this is kind of the numbers I was talking about before. You go from like 100 to like 10. This can be make or break. This can be make or break in the sense that this is still a point when a lot of people are getting cut. However, you can totally do it. And we're going to talk about how to do this very well. And also keep in mind that faculty members are very anxious about finding the right graduate student. And so you're talking to someone who is motivated to figure out if you are a good fit. It's not like talking to a brick wall. There's going to be some give and take. They're excited and anxious, and you're excited and anxious. So just know that going into it. And yeah, so I think phone interview is a misnomer. I think a lot of it will be on Zoom this year, so just don't be surprised, but they'll still call it a phone interview. So what to expect? In terms of how long they are, it totally ranges. And I actually had a personal experience where I thought it was going to be 10 minutes and it ended up being an hour and a half, which is hard to schedule. So I think some people do a really good job of saying, I have a 15-minute slot in this time. Does that work for you? And you're like, yes, 15 minutes, I can do that. Other times you're like, let's just meet at 2. And you're like, okay, for how long? What do you mean? So definitely clarify, especially I was doing some of them while I was at work. I was doing a post back and I would like take, you know, a 15-minute break, but sometimes it's an hour and a half break, question mark. So definitely, you know, it's not obnoxious to ask how long they anticipate it being. Kind of going into it, the first few minutes, it was incredible to me how consistent this was across places. They're just complimenting you. They're like, your application was so impressive. It was really great to read about all of your hopes and dreams. And I'm really excited about the prospect of working with you. And you're like, wow. And then like, it feels really good, right? And then a lot of times they'll dive into asking you very specific questions about your past projects and your future projects that you want to work on. This part of interviewing is very much about kind of the functional, practical elements of grad school. So like, are you going to be able to help them on the projects that they need help on? And so they're going to be asking very specific questions about skills and past experiences. And are you interested in this specific project that I have for you to work on? Some of them also do ask those like super, super typical, like describe a situation when XYZ happened and how you resolved it. I remember a few interviewers asking like, tell me about a time you resolved a conflict at work, you know, like that sort of thing. And those questions are hard to think about on the spot. And so again, I'll talk about it later. I would suggest that you kind of just think about some scenarios beforehand. It's hard to anticipate all potential questions, but I think having a few stories that you've like talked through or like thought through is really helpful. And then this part is so important. And I don't think I really knew that when I was going into it. You need to have questions for them. A lot of times they will leave like 10 minutes for you to ask them questions. And if you're just sitting there like, no, I'm good. Like that doesn't look great. I'm sorry about the lighting. I don't really know what's going on here. But if you're like, oh yeah, no, like I don't have any questions, it kind of makes you look unprepared. So we have a lot of resources in the Next Gen Drive about like what questions you can ask. But I think having specific questions about the projects that they have ongoing, again, more practical questions like what would your role be in the lab? Would you be working with undergrads? Would you be collecting data? Would you be writing? Would you be analyzing? Like what would your life look like in this lab? That's the sort of question you should be asking. Again, because this is just really like kind of a practical interview. And so, yeah, like I said, the goal of this interview is not to just reiterate what's on your CV or in your personal statements. It's really for like getting a sense of like how you would be functionally in their lab. So how do you behave under stress? How do you interact with them interpersonally? This is the first time that they're able to like get your vibe. I keep using this word vibe when I'm talking about like this application process, but it is so important to think about like, is this a good interpersonal fit? Can you get along with this person for like the next 5 to 7 years? Like, can they trust you? Can you have those like one-on-one in-person meetings, like advising meetings, and like meaningfully connect with them? I'm not saying you need to have like a perfect best friendship this first time around, but like generally do get along well. And then I think also there is this understanding that your application materials have been like totally honed and polished. Sorry. Like everyone has proofread their application materials, right? Obviously. So now they're trying to get a sense of, are you as thoughtful and as like poised interpersonally as you are on paper? So this is trying to like really get at that. Yeah. How to prepare. So this is the part that I think we might be able to get to practicing. I did see the question in the chat. I will get back to that in a second. I think coming up with some kind of like working through some phrasing and some like thoughts about common questions can be really helpful, just because you feel like comfortable, like you know what you're going to say a little bit going into it. It kind of puts you at ease. But also when you're in that moment, when you're like stressed and you're like, I can't think of any situations in my life ever. Like that's a rough time to be like freaking out. And so you having kind of thought through it already, or like just having some like ideas of what you've done, like even just having your CV up in front of you while you're on the Zoom call can be helpful to just be like, okay, I have done things. Here are some things that I've done, you know, just kind of like having that preparation, having something like to scaffold how you're thinking about their questions can be really helpful. Like I said this before, do some research on current projects in their lab. So are there a few, one or more projects that you would actually want to work on? And then also figuring out if there are current graduate students. I would say that most faculty members out there do have current graduate students. But in the case that they're like, they were on sabbatical or they took a break or they're a new faculty member, they might not have graduate students. And so it might be hard to get a sense for the role that a graduate student might play. So that's something to like, just be aware of going into this interview, because the faculty member might not actually like have great answers for you if they haven't had a student before, which is not like a critique of them. It's just good to know. Yeah, do a little bit of research about the graduate program. Are there any traits about the program that stood out to you? So some of the schools out there are actually concerned about, you know, are you willing to like move to this area, especially if you're not from the area? So Minnesota in particular, where I'm at right now, at every stage in the interview process, they were really assessing, am I willing to move somewhere where it's like cold for like 6 months of the year? Like genuinely, I was asked multiple times, are you actually willing to move to Minnesota? There are other traits of programs other than like weather, but also just like if you're looking at a program that has, you know, an optional master's in data analysis, that was something I was interested in. That would be good to know and bring up in these interviews and be like, yeah, I was really excited about your program because I saw this. Do you have any students who have done this before? Like, do you think this would be a good option for me? Like, you know, having kind of a depth of understanding of what you would be getting into beyond just the research lab environment is also good. And it helps to make conversation about, you know, things that might be interesting and relevant to the faculty member. Like if they are, in my case, from Minnesota, they would love to talk about the Minnesota snow sports. Like my faculty member and I, this is more in the second round interview, we talked about doing rowing boats down the Mississippi River and going snowshoeing. And it was just kind of like a fun thing to like meet and talk about. And then, like I said, have a solid list of 10 plus questions to ask them. I would rank them beforehand so you aren't like sitting there like, let me just read all of them again and like try to like think through them. It's a lot easier if you're like doing the legwork ahead of time, so you don't drive yourself crazy.
I'm listening to a Zoom call about interviews.
What was that? Oh, did you have a question? Okay, feel free to ask questions later or in the chat. And I would say the nice thing about doing things virtually, either on Zoom or on the phone, is, you can have stuff up on your computer while you're talking to them. So like right now I could be talking to you and I can also have like a Google Doc up of my questions, and I can also have my PDF of my CV. And I think that's a good way, again, to like scaffold, like I said before, to like make sure you have the answers. Or, you know, have some like answers in front of you, but also it's, I think just in case they whip out like, do you remember that project you did in like sophomore year of college? And you're like, do I? Like, what happened in that? Like, I really don't remember. It's nice to just like, you know, have it in front of you. And if you're subtle about it, they can't even tell. And I don't think anyone would like fault you for doing that. Probably don't do what I'm doing right now, which is like, I have the camera here and I'm looking at people here, but my information's over here. That's probably not wise. Also, don't do what I did in terms of having a lot of junk going on in the background and like weird lighting coming in on my face. Probably is just distracting. I don't think anyone's gonna be like, oh, this person's an idiot because there's sun on their face. But like, it's just something to think about as you're kind of planning. just, extra layers of fun things to think about with virtual interviews. Okay, so some questions to ask the PI. Like I said, this is to kind of answer the question in the chat, very much a functional interview. So you are talking like structure of the lab, your roles in the lab, your interests in the lab, what you can bring to the lab, just very like kind of perfunctory need to know knowledge, going both ways. They need to know if you would be a good fit, and you need to know if you would be a good fit. So looking at lab culture to me is very important. I kind of like ranked these in what's easiest to talk about, I think. Questions to break the ice on culture might be good. So what is the culture like in the lab and among graduate students? Something that kept coming up in interviews, which I didn't really like think to ask about, but faculty members kept being like, this is a really collaborative grad student environment. And I was like, oh, like, I hope so. I guess I would be unhappy if it were a competitive grad student environment. So that's just something to think about. I never really encountered a competitive grad student environment, but I guess that's out there and people are trying to preempt that. Talking about mentorship style is very hit or miss. So many faculty members don't have clear ways of articulating their mentorship styles. And it's kind of interesting to watch them squirm and be like, I'm a positive mentor and I like to, they really don't know how to articulate it. But some people do have really clear, like, I will meet with you once a week. This is a positive scaffolding research environment, and I'm going to help you do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to identify goals and work through it together. I wouldn't read too much into the disorganized answer versus the organized answer. But once people start going into like, yeah, mentorship isn't like really what this is about. You just need to like figure out how to do research. Like, that's concerning. So I think it's a good question to ask, but just don't read into it if they don't have a clean answer. But I think it can be a way to bring up red flags. Also understanding the level of collaboration between faculty members can kind of give you a bigger sense of like what the department looks like, if they're all friends or if they hate each other or if they don't talk to each other. Again, it's not like a make or break question, but it can bring up some red flags as you're like starting to evaluate this, like all of these programs. Research. So what projects would I be working on if I came to this school? That's like probably one of the most important questions. I suspect the faculty members will answer that without you having to ask it, but good to know. One good thing to know is, would you want me working on your work or do you want me like extending your work? Some PIs are okay with both. Others are not. Others really just want you lifting up them. They want you publishing their work, working on their work, helping them with their work. And there's not a problem with that. Other people want you like to leave them alone. Not really, that's not the right way of putting it, but essentially to like, they're going to do what they're doing and you can like help if you want, but you can also do other things. Honestly, I'm in the help if you want, but also do other things kind of lab. And that works out really well for me. I'm able to be creative and like also have support. Like, it works pretty well. I think it's important to know based on their answer, like, does that sound awful? Keep in mind like yourself, like who you are, like what sounds good to you, but also the projects. I think there are, I applied to like 12, 13 schools. There are some schools where I was interested in the topic, but not the projects that the PIs were doing. And I suspect some of you are in that same boat. And so if they had said, I need you working on these projects and only these projects, and you're not allowed to like extend it all, I might not have been happy there. And so that's just like a good answer to have in the back of your mind as you're like evaluating multiple schools. Funding. So sometimes the funding is posted online. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the funding that is posted online is old and not accurate. Sometimes you wish it was old and not accurate, but it is. And so I think it's important to kind of getting with the culture again, like, is this something I could live with for 5 to 7 years? Sorry. Just kind of like, is this even like a feasible option for me given student debt, given like cost of living in that area? Obviously getting a stipend of $20,000 in LA is very different than getting a stipend of $20,000 in rural Iowa. Those are just very different like living experiences. Just in terms of like cost of living. So just start asking those questions now. They are not going to think you're like stingy or weird. It's just good to have that information. Okay. This next question, would you be a teaching assistant, research assistant, or both? So for those of you who aren't so versed in graduate school, and that's totally okay to be at this point, grad students tend to get funding through personal fellowships like NSF or Ford, through teaching or like teaching assistantships or being an RA. So like an RA would be like collecting data or analyzing data. The RA ships tend to be funded by the lab that you are working in. There are exceptions where the department will fund your RA ship, but that's not very common. So essentially you're asking the faculty member, do you have money to pay me or would I be TAing? Now, I personally don't think that TAing is the end of the world. I actually really like TAing. Obviously I like lecturing people as you are experiencing right now. So I think it's just good to know going in. I have not heard of a situation where there's no funding. I have heard of situations where funding is guaranteed for like 3 or 4 years, but not all of the years necessarily. Yeah, so it's just good to start that conversation, get a sense of it. Are there other ways that you can like supplement your stipend? That's just also something to talk about. So there was a question in the chat. Are these questions you should be asking in an initial brief interview on Zoom? These questions should be asked on the visiting day when you have an offer. Okay, so I saw you popped in a little bit late. So these are questions to fill the time. Okay, so they're going to start off by saying, welcome, you're amazing, you're incredible. Let's ask you some really hard questions. And then they're going to leave it open-ended. And so you have to decide what is most important for you to figure out during that open-ended question part. I hope that answered your question. And then I don't think you need to ask all of these at all. I think you need to just kind of think through what big topics are important. And what is most concerning about the school? Like, are you concerned about the diversity, like the culture at the school? Then like ask about that, because you're also like trying to get a sense of, can you go here? And then finally, diversity issues. So is this program like actively taking steps to promote diversity within itself? And what is the culture like for my identity? Would I feel validated if I came here? And then like, I think this is also a good time to bring up like, I need XYZ accommodation. Can you support this? Is there any precedent for supporting this? Again, you are interviewing them and showing them that you are serious about this, and you are trying to figure out if this is a viable option for you. Okay, I can open it up to Q&A. I'm happy to go back to any slides. I also have many lists of questions if you want to look at those. Yeah, any questions? Oh, and I can stop. I'll stop recording. Where's the record button? I don't even know how to do this, guys. Okay, there we go.